Alien invasions are a staple of terrifying fiction. War of the Worlds, Independence Day, Trump's campaign speeches. The three-body problem is a modern interpretation of that old plotline with the interesting spin that the author and most of the main characters are from China. Okay, so maybe there isn't an actual invasion in this first book, but there are aliens anyway. From the Cultural Revolution to the digital age, this book spans 50 years of Earth history in a tale that mixes Contact with a dash of The Matrix. Nebula nod, Hugo Award, and a Netflix series, this book has got accolades aplenty. But is it any good? Does it meet the exacting standards of toasting the classics? Get some baiju and drink it neat at room temperature while we find out. It's time for episode 99 of Toasting the Classics, The Three-Body Problem. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, a podcast where we take something that people call a classic. In this case, it's fairly recent, and I think people are calling it a classic, or at least giving it accolades. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to drink something inspired by it while we talk about it, and we're going to decide if it should be a classic. My name is Dave McArthur, and with me today is
Bill Hodges.
Bill Hodges, of fame of various. We're putting together sort of a nature and the West suite of podcasts on Toasting the Classics with Bill. In this case, this has nothing to do with our usual, although it's the West, it's just really far west over the Pacific Ocean and in a whole different country.
I mean,
Because
potentially even east.
This has never made sense to me. Why, as Americans, do we refer to China as being the East? It's west of us. Like, why don't we change that? Why don't we start talking about the West when we talk? But anyway, yeah, we are doing The Three-Body Problem, which is by a Chinese author whose name I will probably butcher. Liu Cixin is how I say it. Anybody can write in and complain about it if I'm doing that wrong. This is a Hugo-winning novel turned into a Netflix series recently, so it's in the zeitgeist. People are talking about it. Bill, what did you think of this book?
You know, I had never read it before, and it was an interesting read. You know, I being from a sort of science background, I kind of wanted to go back and I kind of nerded out a little bit on the science of where this term even comes from, this idea of a three-body problem.
Right.
And kind of the history of that concept goes all the way back to Newton, which maybe we can go into a little more.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about all that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I hadn't read this. I hadn't read this before either. I was aware it existed. I had it on my list of books to read for a really long time. So it was kind of nice to get around to it. It's only about, let's see, it was published originally serially online in about 2006. So we're looking at something that's not quite 20 years old, even in its most proto version when it first came out. Printed as a book, published as a book in 2008, won the Hugo 2015. So it hasn't been around that long. Long enough that maybe we should have read it before now, but
well, not even translated to English until a little bit later.
That's a good point. That's a good point. When was it? I actually didn't
I think it was.
Was the original publishing online, was that done in Chinese or was that done in English? I must have been
in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, then that's not really on us to have not read something in Mandarin, because frankly, even if I had learned to speak Mandarin Chinese, it takes 10, 15 years to learn how to read. So I don't think I can have that held against me. That's not fair. I don't think so. What had you heard about this before?
Well, I had seen the Netflix. It wasn't really even on my radar until the Netflix series showed up, and then I started doing a little bit more background on it. And so I did watch the show on Netflix before reading the book, and so that may have skewed my take on it a little bit.
It has to have, because I started watching the show a couple days ago after having read the book. And just in the first episode, some of the things about the way they make shows today, I just can't stand. And we're in the show, and I didn't love it. But the show, I thought, was much better than the book, because a lot of the stuff that I think happens in future books that is completely left out of volume 1 or underplayed or not really. There's a lot of things going on in this setup that don't even really get talked about in the first book, and I wouldn't even know they were part of the setting if it wasn't for people talking about it and what I saw in the show. Very small kind of throwaway things that lurk in the background of the first book were more obvious in the show. And I think the authors should have front-loaded more of that stuff in the book right away from the get-go.
Well, and interestingly, you know, I think the way that the original text had been written actually changed and shifted as a result of some political dynamics in the country of origin of the author. So, in other words, the Chinese government they were concerned with some potentially politically charged concepts,
I mean,
around the Cultural Revolution, right?
I think this book clearly denounces the Cultural Revolution and denounces a lot of what's going on in the Chinese government, in ways that are only sort of subtle. It's pretty obvious. Well, first of all, just starting out with the chaos of the Cultural Revolution and seeing the brutality of it and the wildness of that experience and how the revolution's just completely out of hand. And then the whole book is a metaphor for that in some sorts of ways. That would not be popular with the Chinese government, I wouldn't think. There's different that's how these kinds of governments go, though. There's different phases where they're more liberal and where they're not, and I think in 2008, 2006, probably liberalizing a little bit and letting people get away with saying what they want to some extent. Whereas today, I don't think you'd get away with writing that in 2024 because the government has definitely been clamping down on freedom of speech and freedom of conscience and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that I think that Mr. Liu he was able to redraft it in ways that then I think with the Netflix series, they just started with the intensity of basically rounding up academics and
Well,
killing them.
so my book did too. Was yours laid out differently?
No, it was laid out the same way.
Oh, okay. 'Cause, yeah, by far, the best parts of this book were the parts that took place in China, where everybody's Chinese, and there's the stuff about the Cultural Revolution was good. I was interested in reading that. The part where the lady goes off to work in the mountains and joins the Red Coast Project, all that was interesting, and I thought was doing a great job. Every time the author left those people, and we're walking around England. Now I'm mixing it up with the show. I can't remember if it's taking place in England or it's in Shanghai, right? Where the guy who keeps seeing the countdown, where does that take place? And that's in China.
That's in China. I think
That's in
like
China, yeah.
outside, whether it's
Those
Shanghai or Beijing, I forget.
those parts
I
are
thought it was
pretty.
Beijing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be Beijing. I actually can't remember, but that's pretty stupid of me. But those parts are all pretty good. Boy, there's just long chapters where he's in the virtual game. I just was not impressed with anything that had to do with this other civilization on another planet. Those parts I thought Trisolaris and the description of them just did not have any realism at all to me. I don't know. That stuff was just really losing me. I was having trouble getting through the chapters where he was in the video game, like for 20, 30 pages at a stretch. And I was like, can we get back to the story that's about the people that I'm reading about? And
Oh, see, that's interesting because, so Lou has a computer engineering background, right? So he's a sci-fi author and a computer engineer. And
uh-huh.
so I thought that I actually kind of liked that part of it. I thought the VR component of it was kind of interesting. And I think it was kind of interesting to do like I find this interest like an interesting comparison to like Contact, right? By
Yeah.
by Carl
Uh,
Sagan and then turned
Not just
into
yeah. So I wrote, yeah, I made some notes about that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that not only is like Contact, but seemed like was sort of inspired or even taken from Contact. And then also Independence Day of all things, that countdown
right,
was like that's
right.
like they're at SETI and they discover a countdown, and I'm like, yeah, that was in Independence. You shouldn't be ripping off things from Independence Day for like what I think is supposed to be sort of a hard sci-fi.
When was
Um,
Independence Day? What year was that?
Independence Day is like 1993,
Okay.
I
Wow.
think. It's a long, long time ago.
Yeah. But
And
so, but like the part, and I think that's another element that I think that the series the Netflix show did a pretty cool job with as far as the VR piece of it. Maybe
uh-huh.
I'm just kind of geeking out on VR.
I didn't
I
I didn't get to that in the show. I watched maybe half of the first episode. I was just starting to get an idea of what was going on in the show, but
okay. Well, I thought that just visually it was pretty cool the way that they did it. But then,
yeah.
getting into the idea that they were, and it wasn't I didn't feel like the connection that it was this alternative, this organization that was on planet Earth that had been influenced by the Trisolarans communications. I don't know
Hmm.
if we want to, if we want to do kind of any background on the
Well, let's
on
go ahead and pour a drink first before we get any
Okay.
farther.
All
So
right. All right.
we decided to go with baiju, which is a spirit that is famous in China and gets mentioned several times in the book. Did you get baiju? Did you manage to come
I
by some?
did. I got some baiju here. Although interestingly, I found out after actually buying it. I bought it online from one of the big retailers. That I actually it's Oregon based out of
Oh, that's
Wilsonville,
fine.
Oregon distillery.
No, mine is
Uh,
from
that
China.
they're
Mine's actually from China. Well, what's your brand called?
So mine is called Family Reserve, and it's just Baiju Family. I think Vin Family Reserve by Vin Distillery.
Okay, mine is called Shunpin Lang, and it's actually Chinese. I went on a whole pilgrimage a couple days ago, all the way downtown to the Canal Street area, and found there's one liquor store in Chinatown, which I thought was weird. I looked it up. I expected there to be like 50 of them, but there was one liquor store in Chinatown that I could find,
Oh,
and
that's
they
interesting.
actually had a pretty good selection of baijiu. So it was actually the right place to go. I talked to the guy that ran the store. He was a Chinese American guy, and he pointed out, he was like, "Oh, here, like this is a good one, like drink it neat." What did he say? He said to sip it. It was a sipping drink. And he said to sip it neat. So that's how I'm doing it, just room temperature and neat.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
completely transparent,
Yeah,
which
see,
right there, I had an idea that it was a whiskey. I thought it was a brown liquor. This is the first time I've ever had baijiu. So right there, I've got a pretty strong surprise just when I saw the drink. I was like, oh, it looks like vodka. It's not vodka, but it is more or less a neutral distilled spirit.
hmm
It's made from, I believe, sorghum for the
it,
most part.
this one is the one I got is rice
Okay. So I don't think it's usually supposed to be rice if it's from China. I think it's supposed to be sorghum, although they said each brand of baijiu uses a different
grain.
QU is the base that you're distilling from, is the word in Chinese. I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know if that's shu, ku, whatever, but there's a different base for each brand, and mine I think is a sorghum, and it's very clear. It's got a really distinctive smell to it.
It does.
It
It's
does not smell neutral. It doesn't smell like vodka. It doesn't smell like pure alcohol. It's 45%, by the way. How much is yours?
oh, what's the the ABV on mine is 53.
Oh,
Yeah,
Lordy.
so this is 106 proof.
Well, be careful with that. All right. Well,
Yeah.
we don't want a repeat of the Uzo incident.
Oh my
So
goodness.
that I
I
have
don't
to
know which to what you speak.
two times doing this show, I have had too much to drink while doing the show to the point where I felt bad the next day. That was one time, and the other time was Four Loco. And and also we might have done two shows back to back on the Four Loco day, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that's two times that the next day I was like, what did I do to myself? But anyway, yeah, the Uzo was a bad one. So let's not have a repeat of that. I have a life to lead. And you are supposed to have food with your baiju.
Okay.
That
All
is
right.
that is the way to do it. So being a very traditional minded guy, I do have a full bag of Sour Patch Kids that I bought at the same time as the baiju, and I'm gonna be
Smart.
I'm
Smart.
gonna be
Those
eating.
that sugary gummy food will I'm sure be a
It'll
benefit.
it'll
I've got
absorb
some.
it'll absorb all the alcohol. I'll be
Oh
fine.
yeah. Oh yeah. And my pistachios will serve that same purpose.
Now the pistachios are not going to be loud, are they?
I don't know. Can you hear that right now?
No, unfortunately, I can't hear the bag. The bag rustling is number one, but also the chewing has got to
That's
be played down to some extent. Let's make sure that we're not doing the not doing like anti ASMR and like grossing people out with the sound of our maws chomping down constantly. So, like I said, very distinctive smell. I've never smelled anything that smells like this. I think that must be what sorghum smells like when you distill it. Or for all I know, it's got notes of something from the aging process, or if there is an aging process or what. Anyway, I'm gonna take a sip here and see what it tastes like.
let's both do that.
It actually tastes a little bit like ouzo, faintly.
A little bit.
There is a little bit of a licoricey taste to it. There's also a little bit of a Sour Patch Kid taste to it. I'm noticing, I'm picking up notes of Sour Patch Kid, green, green
Green
Sour Patch Kid.
green sour patch. Oh,
Which
interesting.
may not be the traditional way to do this, but I don't hate this actually. I'm glad I didn't think it was going to taste like vodka because it does not taste at all like vodka. This is a bit like Aquavit. See, I don't know how much of that is the brand I've got or what, because it is not telling me. There's a picture of a peony blossom, but I don't think that's what I'm tasting. I think I'm tasting something else. It's pretty good. I would recommend people try this actually. This is very, I can sip this at 45%. If I can sit here and sip it, it's pretty tasty. I could
I'm
see how maybe if you didn't know what to expect, you might be a little put off by that smell, but this is not bad. And also the guy did say this was a good one. Like he said it was cheap too. It's a $15 bottle, even
Oh,
at a
okay.
pretty good
Oh,
size.
wow.
And I thought that was very reasonable and it tastes pretty good. He said this was a good value. So actually, that guy didn't steer me wrong.
That's great. Mine is it's a little stronger. I think I'm not getting like the anise or those flavors.
Okay.
I did put it over ice, so I wonder if maybe drinking it neat,
You're supposed to do it neat. It's
supposed to do it neat.
definitely
So,
supposed to be served neat. Yeah.
so my second glass will have to be neat.
It smells a little bit like breakfast cereals, like a box of Fruit Loops, or like or Tricks, like that smell that gives off, like just kind of the like an earthy sugar smell. I don't know how to describe it.
Oh, you silly rabbit. I'm getting a little bit of citrusy. I'm not really getting though
Yeah,
that
yeah,
like
yeah.
anise. I mean, I can kind of taste that a little bit.
No, not. It doesn't taste quite like that. But what I mean is, it's like the aquavit or the ouzo in that there's a sort of spice
Mm-hmm.
aftertaste or note to it that's very
There
different
is.
than vodka or whiskey or something like that.
I agree. I
I
agree.
don't hate it. I don't hate it.
No.
I'm
I noticed in some of my research they do a lot of cocktails with it.
oh yeah, I bet they do. It's
Yeah.
got an interesting taste to it. So let's get back to the book. I'm right now, and I'm ready to be persuaded by you, but I felt like this book reminded me of reading the Da Vinci Code. I started reading this and I was like, this is a dumb book. It's a dumb book. I don't know why people like this book. The guy seems like a really basic, like some elementary things you don't do when you write a novel that he was doing left and right. And I was just like, I don't hate your idea and your setup. Maybe go take a creative writing class. Learn how to show, not tell, was one of the big things. There's this sequence where this is where he really lost me. It was about halfway through the book. The lady who is, for better, I think she's the main character essentially in the book. She falls in with this group of people who are trying to welcome the Trisolarans to Earth. Well, you know what? We should do a synopsis just in case. Anyway, there's lots of spoilers. Keep that in mind, everybody. If you haven't read this or watched this, we're definitely going to be talking about the whole. I don't know. I don't know if the spoilers. I kind of knew what the book was about, and it didn't bother me to have the spoilers. So I don't know how much of a problem that is. But you want to try a little synopsis? Try to do it in about 3 sentences.
Set in the Cultural Revolution.
To not be generous, my synopsis would be: you've seen Independence Day, right? Well, what if that took place in China?
Oh my. Wow.
What if Independence Day and The Matrix had a baby and it was born in China? That'd be sort of how I would describe this. Anyway, sorry, I'm not being generous. So go ahead.
How do I follow up from that? I mean, you get these, they've got radical environmentalists,
Yeah.
right?
Let's just do
M
just
Mike Evans, right?
synopsis.
So you have you have the Cultural Revolution take place. And then years later, you have a child who comes from that and who had been sent to jail because of their family's connections to the academic elitists who are perpetuating, Western philosophy, and so she ends up being so pissed off with the human race that she ends up going and being able to contact aliens. Now the aliens think we're all bugs that are going to kill us all.
Even though the message she actually gets from the aliens tells her not to answer.
The first message, yeah.
The first message she gets from the aliens tells her not to answer because that civilization is dangerous. This is one of my big bugaboos about this book. The aliens live on Alpha Centauri, the next star over. They live one star
Well,
away. It's the next
absolutely.
star over. If you were going
Closest
to,
system to us.
the odds of if you're looking for civilizations on other planets, you're going to look at the one next door.
It's a
And
little lazy, right?
it's a little lazy. Like it's like little. That's kind of one thing I liked in Contact is they actually placed the other civilization in a star that we could see from Earth, but one that's kind of far away, 45, 50 light years away, more like. So at least you'd have an idea that you wouldn't have contacted them or bumped into them or anything like that. I feel like if there was a civilization, I think we're pretty sure there's no civilization that close,
Within 4 light years? Yeah.
4 light years away. I
Yeah.
think we would know if there was a massive star, like spacefaring civilization that close to us. I think that's one of the resolution Fermi paradox is that they're not that close if they're out there. I
Right.
think we'd know if they were that close. But anyway, I thought that was kind of that didn't lose me, but it was in some of the things that were losing me. I was like, really? That's it, right next door? That's where it is. So I guess he needed one with 3 stars, right?
I mean, there are star systems out there. I mean, and at the same time, they're talking about, okay, so you've got these 3 stars that are in these really random orbits. I don't know that the Centauri system is that it falls within that. So I mean, I think just a like a
Falls within
really
what? Falls within what?
within this idea that there is a habitable planet within that system that
We
has
know
3 stars around it.
we know enough today to know that the Proxima Centauri system does not probably have any habitable planets. We know about the planets that are there. They're too close to the star. The star's a red dwarf. It's not a good environment. It gets bathed in radiation all the time. We don't think those kinds of stars are good places for civilizations. I mean, it was written almost 20 years ago, and I'm not sure that information was available. So that's fine. I'll give them a pass on. That's like Robert Heinlein writing about Mars having water and stuff, and you're like, well, you just didn't know any better. But whatever, things change. So she had this experience with contacting them in her much younger life. And later in the book, she encountered, well, actually, earlier, she encounters a Western environmentalist who's living in China and develops really extreme views. He's very wealthy. And she talks to him about this Trisolaran civilization. And he ends up putting together an organization that is going to try and welcome them and spends a bunch of money building a ship, not a spaceship, like an ocean ship that has the facilities to talk to them and whatever. Because everybody wants to just destroy humanity.
Which and so naturally they name the ship Judgment Day.
Yeah, okay. But he's an environmentalist, right? Does he not worry about all the other things on Earth getting destroyed along with the humans? What version of a alien invasion is going to happen and wipe out the humans, but like leave the tigers and elephants? I don't see that. Like
And birds
if they're going to wipe us out and everything, they're going to consume all the resources,
resources.
presumably. Because this is Independence Day and they're like locusts and they go from world to world, eating up everything and destroying it. Not that they've done that yet. That was the part where he really lost me, though. She goes to that ship, and then suddenly the author just stops having the characters narrate what's going on and just goes into this telling mode that tells you what the organization is like and how it's split into 3 factions and stuff. I'm like, it'd be like if George Martin started out Game of Thrones with being like, okay, check it out. So there's like this world, and the Lannisters are like this, and the Baratheons are like this, and this old guy did this. And I'm like, don't tell me that. Show me with a story what's going on. Show me these people arguing with each other, different characters. It's just like the guy has no clue how you're supposed to write a novel. It was really bothering me. I was like, this is not a novel. This is like you just exposition, just giving me exposition in the middle of your book. I enjoyed the parts that were about the woman. Those parts were the parts where she's living through the Cultural Revolution, the part where she gets married and goes off and does the Red Coast Project. I was actually intrigued by that. The virtual reality stuff was losing me. And then when that happened, when the exposition in the middle of the book happened for like 30 pages again, I was like, this is just not well written, man. Like this need if I was in a writing group with somebody that wrote this book, I'd tell them, you got some really cool stuff here, but like redo it. Like draw an outline, show me, don't tell me what you're trying to do, and just go back to the drawing board. And yet this book won all these awards all over the world. I looked at a lot of the commentary that people had about the book, and I hate to say it, but I think a lot of people were grading this on a curve because they were so interested in seeing something that came out of China, which is interesting, that they weren't critiquing the book as a book at all. They were just like, oh, it's amazing there's a voice from China, which it is, and that's cool. And I am interested in that. But I don't think the book has to suck. I think the guy could rewrite the book and make a better book. And I don't think this was a good book.
Do you think this is in part like lost in translation?
I don't think so, because what I'm talking about is structure. I thought about that. I was kind of grading on a curve the pros because I know it's translated, and I know you can't get things. They're not going to translate the right way, right? So there were a couple of times where things were phrased in a really wooden way, but I actually kind of got what the translator was trying to do. He's trying to preserve the rhythm of the original, and I thought that was cool. I dig that. I get that enough to appreciate it, but I'm talking about novel structure, rookie mistakes in putting together a book.
The interview, like post small nuclear dirty bomb.
Yeah, there's all the sequences that involved lots of important people thrown into a room were just terrible. They were
Yeah.
just so poorly written. It was the individual characters I was much more interested in. And does your book have a blurb at the end of it from his next book that's like about a supernova going off near Earth? It's like a disaster book about a supernova that
No, no, that might be because I bought like the trilogy as
oh,
a
okay.
digital, like a Kindle.
Oh, I just have one physical book that's only the first volume.
Okay. Yeah. No, see, I bought it as the trilogy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Did you read the trilogy?
I got a couple hundred pages into the second book, into the Dark Forest.
Okay. And how do you feel?
I'm a little more lost in the second book than I was in the first book, honestly, because it's almost like they're trying to set up, and there's some dialogue, but it's a little dry.
I mean, the dialogue is garbage. Now that could be translation, fine, but the dialogue in this one is just poorly done. I mean, it's I don't know. I really like the character, the Chinese detective guy. He's
Hmm.
fun. There's I don't know, man. There's just some of the stuff is just not handled very well. Like uh, as a writer, like I'm just reading it, I'm like I'm having a hard time believing that this person is like a famous novelist now. Like I said, I think people just kind of starve for material coming from obviously this hugely important part of the world that's kind of cut off from the rest of us.
Right.
But as a book, I'm kind of not willing to overlook the fact that I don't think it's done particularly well. You giving me any pushback on this, or is it, or
I
am I
mean,
alone?
here's what I'll say. I look at like the writing of like Asimov
Not a great writer
as
either.
not the best author. I mean, just in terms of what you're saying as far as the show don't tell.
Right. I think Asimov sometimes, well, no, I think Asimov knows you're not supposed to just tell everybody.
But
I'm not even talking about Asimov would have a character at least tell you the things about the world. It's
but
not
his character development was lacking,
His
right?
character development is 100% lacking, but he does have narrative focus. He
He
starts
does.
at the beginning, follows a character through the whole story, like Caves of Steel we read and we talked about. It's about a person and it follows his life and it shows you the world by telling you the story of this guy. The problems are sometimes like, yeah, his writing doesn't really sparkle. I mean, I probably would not even notice that something translated from another language. I would be willing to give the person the benefit of the doubt their writing was better in Mandarin. The prose, you know what I mean? The actual word
Yes.
choice, the
Yes.
descriptive techniques and things like that. But
That's what's lacking here. Is that
this
what you're
wasn't
saying?
even no. If that was all that was lacking, I'd be fine. It's things
Okay.
that wouldn't be cured by if it was put into the most brilliant language possible. Let's assume he's like, like Muhammad writing the Quran. It's just brilliantly inspired language. It wouldn't fix these problems I'm talking about. Stopping the narrative between characters to have the author suddenly tell you what's happening in the world is like literally you just tell an 8-year-old to stop what he's writing and not do that. That's such bad writing. It's like Bush League, really bad writing.
I don't think this was an entirely lacking novel. I think conceptually, I feel like it's kind of a cool idea.
Well,
I just don't know that I feel like it's entirely original,
that's
right?
what I'm saying is it's like if the book is poorly constructed, then you're saying to yourself, okay, well the concept is probably great, but it's like Independence Day. The only new concept is the thing about the computer, and I didn't like that part of the book. The only interesting thing about it is that it's Chinese, which is interesting, but I don't know if there are other things that come from China. I don't need this book to be from China. Like, I don't know. It's not that interesting that something's from China. It's not,
I mean, they do go into a number of different scientific principles, right?
yeah,
The idea of the three body problem is fascinating. It's like, okay, here's this idea that, a
right.
planet could be revolving around a star, that there could be multiple stars in that same system that could have such a catastrophic environmental on the development of the civilization is kind of is cool conceptually. It's kind of a cool idea.
Well, the one thing I do like about that is that calling it the three body problem, right? And sort of, well, I don't know if I end up liking it because what you're doing is you're referring to sort of the boundaries of our knowledge. It seems like it would be pretty simple to model a three body system. Had you
But it's
told
not. That's the awesome
Right,
part about
right.
it,
That's what I
right?
mean. Had you told me 5 years ago that you had a system with three bodies and could Newtonian mechanics handle that, I would have been like, yeah, probably. Why the heck not? But no, not really, right? So that's pretty interesting that you have the boundaries of knowledge there. That's the part where I started to be afraid it was going to be like Da Vinci Code, is where they were like, oh, where the boundaries of our physics, when we hit the boundaries of our physics, it means physics is breaking down. That is a dumb thing to say. I just, it's not breaking down. You're just having difficulty modeling it. It doesn't mean that the world doesn't function in mechanical ways. I don't know. That kind of annoyed me.
Well, and that we're not actually not able to model it, right? Like that's the
Right.
thing about the three body problem is that we
But it's
actually
not.
aren't able
But what annoys me about that is
to
when
do it.
people are like, and so therefore the world is magical and supernatural. I'm like, no, we just don't know how
Yeah.
to model it. That's not what. I was afraid. I don't think that's where this author ended up going, but I had a moment where I was like, oh no, this isn't the kind of book that like people who are into essential oils and aromatherapy would like. And I was like, I'm really not gonna like this book if it's about that kind of thing. But
Well, DeGrasse Tyson
it didn't
points
end up.
out that that's actually what Newton did in
Uh-huh.
a lot of ways when he originally was coming up with this theory,
Hmm.
is that he's like, well, we can't explain this, but you know what does explain this?
Angels.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
God fixes it. And so I think I struggle with that idea that, oh well, we can't explain it, so
But
we
I've
just
also
leave
heard
we just
Newton.
leave that to God.
There's also a quote that Newton had where I don't remember it was the king or who, but they said, well, what place does God have in your calculations? And he was just like, I didn't have any need of that hypothesis.
That was actually that was
Was that Herschel? Maybe
no, that was Laplace.
Laplace. Okay, all right, yeah,
Laplace, yeah.
I
So
remember.
Laplace actually responds to none other than Napoleon.
Well, that's a lot later than Newton. All right.
Two French guys. Yeah, it was a full century later,
Well,
and
Laplace
it
is the
was
one who's famous for determinism, so I guess that makes sense. That does track. So yeah, all right.
and he came up with the calculus that
Yeah, I
the
was trying to
branch called
reconcile.
perturbation theory, right? Which is the calculus that they use to basically say like it's chaos. Like we can predict, but we can't, or we can model, but we can't predict how these systems, when we get to this immense complexity over long periods of time, we can't accurately predict this, and it's chaotic.
Well, he's not I mean, that's a lot. That's a long time before chaos theory, Laplace.
Well,
But
but I mean that
it
was
must
the
be
principle
some.
there. Yeah. He was
It
he
must
was
be
saying like it's
some.
chaos. It leads it inevitably because of the inability to actually model what's going to happen and to say this is what could even happen.
And speaking of half-assed science fiction, we all know that chaos theory, the number one postulate of chaos theory, is that a zoo full of dinosaurs is impossible. We all know that that's the main thing that we take away from chaos theory is that you cannot
And
keep a Tyrannosaurus Rex in a zoo. So I actually wrote something about Jurassic Park. Yeah, I actually said I have a quote here. It says, "That's dumb, like chaos theory in Jurassic Park." I'm not 100% sure what I was commenting on by saying that, but that's in my notes. Dumb
huh,
like chaos in Jurassic Park.
dumb like
It was a little bit like that because I remember thinking when I read Jurassic Park the first time, which I love that book, I remember thinking, what is chaos theory doing in this book? It's like this guy just read about some interesting theory and wanted to throw it in the book and be like, ooh, did you know about chaos theory? And most people be like, no,
it's an
thanks. I mean, it
it's an
doesn't actually have anything to do with the book in any way, but it's just in there because it's cutting edge, scientific thinking at the time. And that's cool. I like that, but I don't know if it
uh,
really was tied in. But I was trying to find the metaphor for why we were talking about the Cultural Revolution at the beginning of the book. It's sort of a separate theme. Now, thematically, I think there's some interesting things going on here, right? Like, I do think that there's some interpretive value to what's going on in this book. There are some themes that are kind of fun to talk about. But like I said, I would have sent this author back to the drawing board to restructure the novel. But I thought that the idea of introducing with the Cultural Revolution and then someone who's scarred by the Cultural Revolution being so upset with the state of humanity that she decides to bring in aliens to wipe away humanity because people want revolution without realizing that revolution is worse than any of the problems you have. The chaos that is unleashed by something like revolution is much worse than anything you're complaining about. You need to figure out some way to work within what exists without destroying everything, right? Clearly, the Cultural Revolution was worse. Well, I don't know if that's true for China. Maybe China before World War II maybe was bad enough that something like the Cultural Revolution might have been justified. But today, I think when people ask for revolution, I think we're looking at societies that do not have problems that are worse than those that we've got ushered in by revolution. Did you see what the whole trilogy is called?
Yes, it was Remembrance of Earth's Past.
Oh, Remembrance of Earth's Past. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. I wrote Remembrance of Things Past. But regardless, Remembrance of Earth's Past is reminiscent of Proust, right? And I happened to be reading that biography of Oppenheimer, and they were talking about
Hmm.
the remembrance of things past in there.
Hmm.
And so I had it on the brain. I was like, wait, where were they talking about Proust in this book? And it sent me on this wild goose chase. And I suddenly realized, oh, that's the other book I'm reading that doesn't have anything to do with. There's some pseudoscience going on in this. I don't know if you noticed. He believes weaponry is available to the top governments on Earth that is not available to them. Like he's talking about like ball lightning weapons and
Oh.
sonic weapons and nanofiber weapons and stuff. And I'm like, none of this stuff. This is the kind of thing I remember. I've talked to some sort of conspiracy theory types who believe the government has access to these weapons and they don't. It's a little cockamamie. And I think it might have something to do with sort of a paranoid view of Western governments and what weaponry they might have access to. And
Hmm.
that seemed kind of strange in the mouth of someone who's like a person of science to be like believing in ball lightning weapons I wasn't sure what was going on there. Is this supposed to take place in the future? Maybe?
I don't think so. I mean, well, so
I
the
didn't.
Dark Forest and I think the third novel, do they take
Well, no,
place kind
they
of
referred
years
to a
later?
war. They referred to a war between NATO and China.
Did they?
I think
I don't
so.
remember
I
that.
think they did talk about that. I think there was some kind of a conflict between NATO and China in this world.
Okay,
So maybe it
that's
does take
interesting.
place in the future. So that would make a little bit more sense then. I guess that would resolve that part. Yeah, I
S-
was enjoying some of the stuff at the beginning. I was enjoying how his metaphors tended not to be human metaphors. They tended to be like science metaphors, which was kind of cool. I kind of was liking the prose in that. There was a part where he was saying that using up your emotional energy leaves you like a Geiger counter that can no longer detect radiation. And I was like, that is a really robot autistic thing to say about expending your emotional energy, but I do get the metaphor you're using. Like, I get what you're saying. It's just a really strange way to think about
Human
human
emotion.
emotions. Yeah.
Hmm.
Like maybe something that somebody that doesn't have a lot of emotions would say. Like,
I had kind of dorked out a bit on the three body problem, getting into like Newton and Jupiter and looking at some of the other ones our friend talked about with extraterrestrial life. We've kind of already touched on that a little bit. We've touched on how likely is it that we're going to have an alien species capable of getting here, right? Getting to our solar system.
do you know what my new theory for the Fermi paradox is? Actually, it's weird. It's something I never heard anybody mention before. Is that look at what's happening to our society today as we get this technology and we have more and more technology. We've got AI, we're interconnected through computers and things like that. Because you look at the universe and you're like, in the 60s, you're looking at space and you're saying to yourself, it'll be like Star Trek. We'll all be like going around the universe and exploring and wanting to learn about the galaxy, right? Obviously. Why wouldn't we do that? Nobody under the age of 40 wants to leave their house anymore. They don't have to, right? They don't even go out and date anymore or anything. They just stay at home and I'm thinking the world would probably just be like that 50 years from now with technology. It might be we don't see the other civilizations out there because you reach this terminal level where nobody wants to do anything outdoors anymore. They
Hmm.
just stay home and they mess around on virtual reality and let AI run everything. It's almost like the Wally world. Like you get to the point where your technology just kind of takes care of you. Why would you risk your life getting into a rocket ship and going to another galaxy or going to another star system? Why would you even bother talking to people? You just lose interest in everything because you're
Yeah.
just taken care of. You basically get to a point where you turn your civilization into cattle. They're just raised by AI.
To
That's
do
like the
what?
new
I mean, what do we end up doing? Like how the
nothing. Nothing.
yeah,
You just enjoy yourself. You just feed. You just feed and you go on virtual reality and
maybe learn?
yeah, that's what we used to think. But it's kind of actually, you know what I think it's like? It's like the time machine where he goes into the future and he meets the Eloy and he's like, "Oh, wow, everything's taken care of. You have all this food. Like, what do? You have time for experiments and books?" And they're like, "No, we just frolic in the water. We don't even know where our food comes from. We've bifurcated into one species that lives underground and eats some people and runs the machines, which in this reality I'm talking about, you wouldn't even have that. You just have AI doing all those
Doing
jobs.
all those things.
And then everybody would be the Eloy. You're just completely unthinking and unexamining and just taken care of. And I think that might be the resolution to the Fermi paradox is that we didn't kill ourselves with a nuclear war. You just kill yourself by not needing to do anything anymore.
But doesn't that kind of leave out like the need for resources?
No, that you have the AI work with robotics to produce resources to keep everybody alive, right?
But what is the AI doing to generate and extract those resources?
It's
Like unless
managing the
unless we're saying that those resources are infinite.
no, it manages the robots.
Okay.
Nobody has to actually extract resources or farm or mine or anything or invent anything. You just have AI that runs all the robotics to make sure everybody's fed. And that's what we ask the AI to do for us. This is assuming we don't teach the AI to wipe us out completely. You just have it manage everybody and nobody ever wants anything. To me, that seems incredibly horrible and like nobody would be actualized. But I think it's because I grew up in a time when I wanted more. I think younger people don't want those things. They don't want to go see the world. They just want to stay at home and play video games and you know, they don't want to talk to a girl. They want to look at pornography. You know, they're just taken care of. I think that might actually be why civilization doesn't get anywhere after a certain point.
Not because of the Solons,
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that part either.
the near light
Is what
traveling,
could
right?
spell that for me because I'm
Solon. Is that
SOL like Solon, like the lawgiver of Athens, like that. SOLON, Solon. Okay.
those were the tiny where they were Sophons. I'm sorry,
Yeah. Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
SOPHONS.
So fun. Yeah, right. Like
Yeah,
knowledge.
the tiny supercomputers.
Yeah, the tiny supercomputers that exist within like multiple dimensions and inside superstring theory, basically. And I was like, you're getting a little bit far-fetched for me. But then I'm like, okay, if you could do that, why would it be so limited? Why couldn't you do all kinds of things with that? Why couldn't you like send a Sophon to another galaxy or another solar system or whatever, and then have it construct droid factories to wipe out everybody that live, you know, pop into I don't know. I wasn't 100% sure on why that was so limited. But I was thinking about, you know, I had this experience the other day where I was talking about seeing the total eclipse. One thing you have to understand about me is I do not watch cable news. I'm completely divorced from the reality of the culture wars. And it did not occur to me that I mentioned going to see the total eclipse. To me, total eclipse, why the heck would not anybody want to see that? Right? I didn't know that was an argument I needed to make. And I mentioned seeing it to somebody who was conservative, and they were like, oh, did that like change your life? Was that like amazing going to see the total eclipse? And I was like, I don't know about change my life. It was neat. And I was coming from the perspective of like, why wouldn't you want to see a total eclipse at least once in your life?
Right.
And I realized it's become a it's become a thing for people, the Fox News crowd, to make fun of people for wanting to see the total eclipse. And I realized it's because they're always trying to discredit basic science, right? Because the kind of person who is interested in seeing solar eclipses is probably the kind of person who believes in climate change, for example.
Right.
And it's like the Sophons coming to Earth and trying to discredit basic science to shut down technology on Earth. I think there's like a movement kind of on the right side of things to just discredit science in general, which to me doesn't seem like politics. To me, science is not politics, it's just science, right? But anyway, maybe I'm just talking out of my butt. But
Until science is politicized.
science can be politicized, but usually the problem is because somebody is just saying, well, this is science. And I'm like, if you're saying that something is just science, you don't understand how science works. Science does not give you the answers. Science does not give you political answers.
Right.
Science tells you some facts, it proves some certain things, and then you can decide what to do with those facts. That's politics. But science itself does not give you a political answer, right? If science says to you, for instance, if science says to you that wearing masks and shutting down businesses during COVID will save a certain number of lives, That may be a scientific fact, but that does not necessarily mean you have to do that. You could decide not to do that based
Yeah.
on other reasons. You could have a
Right.
different policy that takes that into account and says, okay, fine, I understand that. That'll cost a certain number of lives. But frankly, shutting down the global economy and losing 2 or 3 points of GDP globally will kill just as many people. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay open. That would be a perfectly reasonable conversation to have, balancing the knowledge that science, you don't just say, oh, science is BS.
I hear what you're saying, and that did take place, right? We saw that play out.
But I think what people did is they just denied science. They were like, science, or one side said they denied science, and the other said, no, the science tells us to do this. And I'm like, the science doesn't tell you what to do. The
The science
science
gives evidence of
describes
what,
reality and gives you
right?
evidence about reality. You can, it's like it's like if you said, well, science tells me that an airplane weighs more than air and therefore can't go into the air and it needs to go a certain speed in order to be able to fly. And so you say, well, science tells us that we can't fly. It's like, that's not what science said. Science gave you the difficulties you might have with flying. You can now decide whether it's worth trying to fly. Let's do our biggest surprise. What surprised you about this book?
It just read really dry. I think my
Yep.
biggest surprise is how
Poorly written
dry,
it was?
how dry, dryly written, how it was almost like they were coming up with lists. There were a
Yes.
couple of
What I
parts
mean about
throughout in
show versus tell. That's what I'm talking about.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Don't
yes.
don't list the factions that exist in your universe. Show me characters that have to do with the factions and I'll like I said with Game of Thrones, like don't freaking tell me there's Lannisters and Baratheons and I'm like forgetting it, Dothraki or whatever.
Sure.
Give me some of those people, and every once in a while someone can say something about those people that serves as exposition. Show me, don't tell me. That's just bad writing, man. It's just basic bad writing. It reads like a Wikipedia article, some of the stuff in this book.
And I guess I had hoped after watching the series in particular, because I thought that the show did a amazing job.
The show does a much better. I only watched the first episode, and the show was doing a much better job because David Benioff and his writing partner, I think it's Weiss, those guys know how to write.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
they're
So that
they're taking something that was not a particularly scintillating read and turning it into an interesting world. I don't know whether they land it. I don't know whether they land the plane at the end of the show. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I could tell that they had recognized right away what sucked in this book, and they were fixing it,
yeah.
and they were doing a good job of it. But anyway, they also adapted Wolverine into the movie, the
Hmm.
one where the Wolverine Origins, if you
The
remember that.
Origins one? Oh,
Yeah, pretty
okay.
sure those same guys wrote that. It was okay,
It
but
was fine.
I didn't
Yeah.
think it sucked as much as other people have said, but it wasn't great. They also, as if I remember correctly, wrote Toy Story 3, which is an amazing adaptation of the material they had to work with from Toy Story. Like it's really, really well done. It's a lesson in writing of how you take, a property which is fine and you just take off running. It's like what happened in The Empire Strikes Back, where George Lucas had created some characters that were okay, and then when they wrote the second one, just somebody just adapted the F out of it and took off running with the characters that were in the first one. I completely hijacked you. Your biggest surprise was how dry the book is.
Yes. Compare relative to, well, other books and the series
relative
in particular.
relative to good books.
Relative to other books that I've enjoyed more. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
To
yeah.
be to
Sorry.
be to be kind
I
about it.
know I'm
Yes.
I know I'm leading I'm definitely leading the witness a little bit, and I
No, no.
apologize for that. But you're perfectly capable of coming up with your own opinion. And I wish I could be quiet, but I guess I'm a little annoyed with this book. I just the writing of it was just not great. And honestly, I could say that's probably my biggest surprise as well. I was in for the first 100 pages or so about the woman in China and stuff like that, and the Red Coast Project, and I was like, okay, this is kind of a Chinese. It takes place in China, so that's different, and it's a novelization kind of Independence Day or Contact, and then like about 50, 60 pages in, I was like, no, this is just a bad version of those things. Like I never actually read Contact.
No, I
But
didn't
this
either.
this was clearly inspired by Contact because Contact was all about her feelings about her dad. She meets that guy and like has the conversations with him. She works at a remote place, detective. I mean, there's a lot from Contact, which I only know the film, and I admit perhaps the book is completely different. But
And I imagine it would be because it was Sagan.
yeah, I don't know if he's a good novelist.
Right.
Honestly, I really
Right.
don't know. I never read I never read a novel by him. I read a lot of his science writing, and I loved him. He's like Neil deGrasse Tyson to me, very
Hmm.
like affable. Actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson is much more affable. Carl Sagan is a little,
He's a
what's
little
the word
drier.
for it? A little more dry, right? Like,
I mean, the Cosmos
but
series, if you compare the
but
two, are very
they're
different. Yeah.
they're they're, they're
Anyways.
similar. They're two guys that I really like who are
Yeah.
working in the field of science, like getting science communication is the word I'm looking for, and that's very important. And I love what they do, but I don't know whether Carl Sagan was a good writer. I really never read the book, but anyway, this one seemed to be like that, and maybe reads kind of similarly, I would guess, except that these aliens are hostile. I guess is a big difference.
Right.
So, like I said, it's like Independence Day had a baby with contact. And then sometimes that baby would wander into a room where the Matrix was showing. What else is like that? What other book is like the parts that were in virtual reality that I really was having trouble getting through. I kept looking and I'd be like,
Lawnmower Man. I don't
yeah,
know.
like Lawnmower Man. I literally was thinking about that just now. I kept looking, I'd see a chapter and it was about him playing the game. I was like, oh, come on. I'd flip to see how many pages it was going to be. And I was like, man, like
See,
this
it's
is,
interesting. I didn't mind that part. Like, I didn't mind the VR stuff, but I'm kind of been geeking out a little bit more on VR
uh-huh.
recently in terms of applying applying VR to education.
Well, I
And
don't have a problem with VR as a concept, but I was just like, it
you
was
just
too
weren't
abstract.
engaged in it.
It
It
was
was
too
too abstract.
abstract. It was like,
Yeah.
wait, what are you doing, man? Like, and I was very disappointed when it turned out because I was reading it. I was like, okay, I guess the things about this civilization that don't make any sense are kind of just because it's in a VR world and it was created. And I'm like, wait, no, this is actually what the aliens are supposed to be like. And I was like, that's dumb. They dehydrate
They
themselves.
dehydrate themselves.
Do
Yeah.
you know what it reminds me of?
What's that?
And I think this is perhaps the most damning thing that I could possibly say about this book. There was a novelization by William Kotzwinkle of the potential sequel to E.T. called E.T. and the Green Planet,
Hmm.
where E.T. goes back home and is on a planet and is trying to get back because he knows Elliot's in trouble. But he goes back and he's on this planet, the Green Planet, walking around with, and I'm not making this up, a sentient towel,
Oh,
walking around the Green Planet with a sentient towel. And the whole time I was reading it, I was like, this is terrible. This is too abstract. I don't even believe this as being a potential alien that exists. That's what I was feeling. I was like, it felt like I was reading E.T. and the Green Planet again. Every time it would go into those sequences. And I was like, can this just stop? This doesn't sound real. And then I was very disappointed when that's what the actual alien civilization is, a bunch of people that can dehydrate themselves. Why would that happen? I don't know. It's just how could there be life on a world that was like that, that was constantly bathed in radiation and heat everyone? I don't know. I didn't buy it. I didn't like it. I don't know. My biggest surprise is probably how much I just didn't think this was a particularly good product. The biggest surprise otherwise was that baiju is clear and that I kind of like it.
you know,
Um,
I'm having my second.
yeah, I'm on my second glass as well.
Yeah, and I took it neat this time.
Yeah, it's
Poured it
better that
neat.
way, right? It's better
Yeah,
that
I
way,
think so.
right?
I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah,
it definitely
it brings out a little bit
a little bit more of
better.
the sorghum. I mean, that's what everybody wants, right? We all just want more sorghum in our
More
lives.
sorghum. We need more
Yeah.
sorghum. Although apparently this is rice, not sorghum.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. I'm
So
getting definite.
I'm curious. I'm curious
I'm
though.
getting I'm getting notes of sorghum and of millet and
Sorghum and millet,
what are some other bizarre grain, not bizarre at all grains, common grains that I just don't know what they are.
because we don't really use them here in the United States.
One thing I never really realized about China is that China is like, you think of China, you think the basic crop is rice, sort of
Yeah,
associate China with rice, but really,
sorghum's far more widely populated or distributed than rice is throughout around the world, globally.
but it's also because China actually, the Chinese civilization that we really know, like Han Chinese civilization, actually started in the north in the Yellow River and
Hmm,
spread and conquered the Yangtze in the
hmm,
south. Actually, all those people down there are like completely ethnically distinct people that had their own civilizations and cultures, but were like kind of like conquered by northern people.
hmm.
And it's like the difference between, I'm trying to think what the comparable difference, it would almost be like the difference between Europe and sub-Saharan Africa in terms of how different those cultures were. And really, the Yellow River, there was rice, but there was also wheat, or not wheat specifically, but millet, sorghum, all kinds of things growing up there. And it's really southern China is more like definitely rice based. The immigrants to America tended to be from southern China. So
Hmm.
we sort of have a mixed up idea of China in the United States, in other words. Like we have kind of a Southern Chinese bias, I think.
Interesting.
because that's who came here. How are we going to vote? I mean, it's hard. I guess technically this was my pick, so I guess it's really not me that gets to pick. But I don't think I would vote for this being a classic. I don't know. I don't even think this nailed some of the things that Asimov gets right, which is you had me for a second, and I totally agree with you that he has serious limitations as a writer, but I
Yes.
found his narratives to be better written and more engaging.
His main characters had more development.
Well, Caves of Steel was a story
Caves of
about
Steel
a
as,
guy.
as yes.
Caves of Steel was a story about a guy all the way through the book. If nothing else, at least I followed one character, and there was a plot about that guy, and
Well,
we got
the entire Foundation series is very similar in that way.
well, the Foundation books, the original three Foundation books, are a little absent in that sense. I don't know. I actually found the ideas behind the Foundation to be more interesting than the ideas behind this,
Then
right? Like,
this
yes,
series.
like the
Okay.
idea of a galactic. First of all, it's the first place where anybody really talked in detail about a galactic civilization. But just the idea what's the word that they use for it? It's not cleometrics, but it's something like cleometrics. The science of history, in other words,
Oh,
developed
psychometrics.
psychometrics. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the idea that you could try to save the future civilization from falling, or sorry, shorten how much time you were gonna have within that. Anyway, I think it's up to you to vote, but I think I've made my feelings heard.
I think you and I are in a similar place on this. I don't know
Oh,
that I can.
I kind of thought you might have liked it a lot more than me, but okay.
I like parts of it, but at the same time, it
I like
was.
parts of it too. I didn't hate everything about it, but yeah.
Do I think of it as a classic? I think that this book took like, and we've already said this. This took too much from other ideas that have already been out there.
I mean, if you're getting your ideas from Independence Day, which is not a great work of science fiction, that's a fun movie, but it's just a fun movie. The basic concept comes from H.G. Wells and is like more than 100 years old.
Yeah,
Alien Invasion. The first book about alien invasion should get credit for that idea. That's a cool idea, right?
absolutely. War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, right? I mean, as far as I know, that's the original
As far as I know, yeah. I mean, there was,
sci-fi. And
Carter and Mars. I don't think, I don't think Burroughs. I don't think they ever came together.
I'm not sure how much of Edgar Rice Burroughs qualifies as science fiction, to be perfectly honest. I think it's something
Carter and
else.
Mars series.
Yeah, I don't think that's about science fiction. What scientific concepts? I mean, it's just like a fantasy that takes place on
More
Mars.
fantasy. Yeah.
He doesn't even space travel to Mars. He teleports there through like magic or something. All right, so
So
sorry. I cut you off once again, as I'm wont to do.
I feel as though there's a lot of other literature out there that predates this, that touches on a lot of similar ideas. I think this brings in a lot of scientific theory and a lot of astrophysics that is fascinating. Is there the possibility of life on other planets? Right?
Oh, yeah.
But that's been done.
That's been done. Yeah. I honestly thought it was going to be more like Contact, which was like pretty straightforward narrative. I mean, again, I'm talking about the movie, but pretty straightforward narrative and like using science and like it was concrete. You didn't like run off into it was very similar. This book is very similar to the film Contact
I agree.
in terms of what happens in it, but lost me a lot more. I am actually willing to grade something on a curve because I am interested in hearing what's going on in China. But I don't think even being graded on the curve, I think this still gets like a C for me.
I think that the novelty of it is what has caught so many people's attention.
I think so. I mean, when I read the comments, I mean, literally every comment was like, it's great to finally hear what's going on in China. It's great to finally hear a voice from China. I'm like, okay, yes, but, right? Like, this is not that great. But anyway, so, all right. So it sounds to me like you're voting against.
I am
Okay.
voting against.
We are not toasting a Three Body Problem, the novel, as a classic. And it makes me a little sad to do that because we don't normally do that. We're usually, but yeah, I think that's the right choice. I'm pretty happy with that. So this is Dave McArthur, sadly and forlornly stating that Toasting Classics has not certified the Three Body Problem as a Hood classic. Bill, thanks for joining me. Thanks for doing this with me. Thanks for having a drink with me. It's always pleasant to have a drink with you, and we will probably hang out a little bit after we sign off here. Peace out, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks again.
That's it for episode 99 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, you'll have to stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking when we do something special for our 100th episode. You will have time, though. We're taking a little summer hiatus, but look for a new episode in August. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know if you ever got around to watching the rest of the Three Body Problem. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @attractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.